So this whole Crazy Patchwork quilt is made in exactly the same method as one of my very first videos, which I know people still watch. It's called An Unusual Crazy Patchwork Technique. I have done a brief recap about how to make a small panel. So given that this quilt is made mostly out of Crazy Patchwork, I thought it was time to do a little refresher after my original Crazy Patchwork video. So this is a sort of simplified method. These 3 pieces of fabric are going to be placed on a piece of interfacing. Don't worry too much about the size of anything. This is actually for a pin cushion for a different video, and my pin cushion is going to be, the finished size is going to be, for the top piece of fabric, is going to be 4.5 inches. I'm going to allow a little extra just because of when we're stitching pieces on. I can always trim it at the end, but if I trim a little bit off now, get it close to the finished size as possible, you end up wasting less fabric. So the fabrics I've chosen for my pin cushion are these. This is the back piece, and then these are the pieces that are going to make up our Crazy Patchwork. So the traditional method of Crazy Patchwork is that you would put one piece down on the body of the work. We'll use this, just the back of this, just to show. So you would stitch one piece down like that, and then you would put another piece on like this, and then you would do a running stitch along here, and then you would flip it like that. And then you'd have no raw edges, and then as so on and so forth, and keep doing that wherever you can. If you've got any raw edges, you can tuck them under and do the needle turn applique method, and then all of these borders and edges would be embroidered with beautiful flowers. We're not doing that. We're doing a method that's a lot more approachable for a lot more people, I think, that will give you a similar result, is fun, and you won't get fed up with the embroidery. I personally love embroidery, but I also like getting things done. What we're going to do is use the interfacing as the backing fabric. Now this is an iron-on interfacing. You can see there's a slight, I hold it up, you see there's a slight sheen to it on that side. That's glue side up. The other side is not shiny. So it's important that you have it glue side up. Guess who I am the wrong side to the ironing board. Oh, I can't believe it. So what I want it to look like, sort of, is like this. So I'm going to just draw a 4.5 inch square on the back of my interfacing so that I can line all my pieces of fabric up with the edges so they'll be in the right place. Now I have made a slight mistake with this, completely forgetting I needed 1/4 inch seam allowance along the edge of this so I didn't lose this pattern. However, it's a pin cushion and it's fine. So once you've ironed on your fabric onto the piece of interfacing, it's starting to take shape now, you need to pay attention to where your overlaps and raw edges are. Now, fortunately for me, I can do this really easily because there is no interfacing under that bit because of the strip behind it. So I can literally place this bit under here to cover up this raw edge down here, but also provide a nice little piece of interest along this here. I'm going to go with the straight edge of this, even if it's not straight on here, because that's what we'll notice more. And then this one, I'm going to actually just zigzag around it to hold it in place. So we need to cut it to size and pin it in place. There we go, and then I can pick that up and just trim off the excess lace. What I usually do in Crazy Patchwork is I would cover all of the raw edges, so all of them would be covered, but the pieces are quite a lot bigger usually than this. I could put a piece along here like that if I wanted to, and if I was normally doing like a big panel, I would definitely put something over that, and then I'd have, you know, a piece down here and it would all be covered. But because this is something different, I'm approaching it in a different way. I had sort of thought about putting lace all the way around the edge, but then all you would see would be a little edge, this edge bit here, and I don't really see the point. I think the only way that would work is if I managed to find a small, you know, almost like doll's clothes size I had a quick rummage to see if I could find anything, and all I could find was these two pieces. And they're just what I'd call sort of doll size. I've zoomed in so you can see what they look like. This one, which is off-white, which would probably go best, there isn't enough to have it sticking out this way. It would actually have to be stitched down as a little design like this. That one's too short. There isn't any more of that. I can't find the one I wanted, which was a Victorian one, which is beautiful. I found this one. This is a modern lace. It's cotton. It's nice enough. Now I could stitch this to be popped out like that, and how you would do that is to put this all on the inside, then do like right sides together like this, stitch round, then when you turn it out the lace edge will just pop out. I don't want to do that because I don't. But I could stitch it all the way around like a little frame like this. And probably the best way of doing this is to do a piece down each side and then a piece across the top and the bottom, rather than trying to turn neat corners. There's no need to turn neat corners on this because we don't need to pop it out. So it's just to have this sort of lacy bit here, which I think looks really cute. When you're doing this method of crazy patchwork, the easiest way to think about the order in which you stitch is to think about what's closest to you. So in this instance, this is for a pincushion I'm making. This lace edge here is going to be closest to me. It's the thing that's right at the front, so it's the last thing to be stitched on. So the first thing to be stitched on will be this thick lace here. Underneath that bit, what I'll do is at the machine I will pop these pins off and stitch that piece of lace down. Then the second thing to be stitched will be this raw edge, which I wouldn't normally leave, but that will need stitching down. I'm going to do that in the smallest zigzag I can manage. And again, I'll be popping the pins off here and here to get to that bit. Then the very last thing to do will be to just secure this lace edge down to make it look really pretty. If you are going to use a canvas and you are going to scale this up to put it on a canvas, I'll put a link to how to mount your work on a canvas. You must have an overlap to wrap around the sides and the back of the canvas. It's no good if you're using a canvas or something that this would be your finished edge. It will be gone. It'll literally look like that. So just pay attention when you're doing that, what you want to do. So I just wanted to say about the order. So you actually stitch on the furthest away, coming all the way to the closest to you, which in this case is this one. So when you've got the background fabric all stitched down and looking gorgeous, it looks really cute, doesn't it? It looks so nice. It's time to choose to put the embroidery on, the saved embroidery. I've used lots and lots of saved embroidery in the quilt that we're looking at today. I'm making this pincushion to sort of go with my needle case. And this was the same antimacassar or tray cloth, can't remember. And I thought it would be really nice to use the same flower on here. I did think about using the pink one, but it's a bit much for me. Or I've got just these little lazy daisy stitch flowers that might look nice. Do they look a bit like an afterthought? They need another flower really, don't they? What about this little one here? That might look quite nice. In fact, I think that would look very nice. What I'm going to do is I'm literally going to cut this off with scissors so I can save the lace for another project, because I save everything. And then I also know that I will be using all of this embroidery at some point in the future. So what I'll do is I'll iron bonder web to this whole piece, even though I'm going to use this bit. That's how I stabilise saved embroidery, particularly when I know it's going to come up against quite a lot of wear and tear. But even with a quilt, even if it's just a quilt that's been to exhibition like this one has so far, it is intended to go on a bed and be used. And so I would really like it to not fall apart, because that doesn't look good on me and it sort of defeats the object. And it does mean we get to see all these beautiful embroideries that otherwise would just be chucked out. You know, the number of of job lots of embroidery I have bought because people just don't want them anymore, which I think is so sad. And I'm not talking your pristine tray cloths and tablecloths and things like that. I have those too, and I would never dream of cutting those up. In fact, in some cases, I've been given some of those to use and I've thought they were too good, and I've actually given them to people, or I use them myself as tablecloths and things. That brings me to a little project I'm going to come up with. We're going to do a shrug out of a tablecloth at some point, so that would be cool. So I'm just going to get the iron out again and just put this bit of Bondo web on. So after Bondo web ironing and cutting it out carefully, I'm going to place it somewhere on here, wherever I think it looks best. So it could be here, could be here, could be whatever you like. I actually think just up here is nice. I think it looks cute. And after I've gone to all the trouble to keep as much of this label in here as well, I think that makes sense. However, when you next see it, it could be in a different position. Who knows? But anyway, when you've decided where you want it, you need to iron that bit on. So I've got you zoomed in as close as possible to the foot. And I've just changed the thread from the darker it was on that, it's now on a lighter colour. The reason for that is the piece we're using is an off-white, and that darker colour will really show up going around this. And we just want to attach this. We don't want to be going, hello, it's all stitched on by machine. So the next thing you need to do is adjust your tension, your top tension. You need to adjust that to 1. And the reason why we're doing that is so that all of your stitches will be pulled around to the back of the fabric. So you'll have lots of lovely top thread, whatever that thread is, pulled around to the back of the fabric as well. So literally it'd be like a little loop and then 2 big loops. That's what it will look like. And that's so that you don't get any different colour coming through. It means that you can use cheaper thread underneath if you're using metallics or something like that. So always set it, if you're doing something like this, always set it to 1. And then the next thing is we need to set the zigzag. We're using a zigzag. We are not satin stitching. I can't think of a single area where a machine satin stitch looks good, except maybe on an embroidery machine. So we're on zigzag, and we need to set the width as small as you can cope with. Now, I've been doing this a long time. I can do it really small. So on mine, that will either be 3 or 3.5 stitch width. And then we need to readjust the stitch length as well. And I usually adjust that to about 1.5. So we are talking tiny. But I would say if you can adjust the stitch width, practice doing that before you adjust the stitch length. It makes quite a difference straight away. The next thing you need to be aware of is where your needle falls on the foot. Some needles will do a zigzag that goes from the middle to the right or from the middle to the left. Mine doesn't. Mine goes right across the middle, so it's part right and part left. So it's really hard to do this on this machine. And then if your needle goes to the right, then you start with the centre part of your foot on the edge of the work. If your needle goes to the left, you stitch around the other way round. So like I'm going this way, you would go this way instead. So starting with the work on the middle part of the foot, but stitching round. Then put your presser foot down. Make sure you've got a good tail. I think my needle, because it's slightly halfway over the middle of the foot, I think my needle's in the final place for the stitch. So I am going to hand crank the first one in place just to see where it goes, and sure enough it is, and then adjust until I think it's going to be in the right place. Now unfortunately I have chosen a super small piece to show you, but we'll just go for it. Hopefully you can see what I'm doing, okay? Right, straight away I know my stitch width is too wide, so I need to adjust it. Right, I'm down to 2.5. Let's see what that's like. Right. My stitch length is still too long on this tiny bit of embroidery. So we're now down to 1.3. Perfect. So my final measurements for the zigzag are 2.5 on the stitch width and 1.3 on the stitch length. And for something small, it's probably important. Don't worry if you overstitch the design, because there's so many curves and things. Just put the needle down if it's only gone over by one stitch, and then just pivot off of that and start again in the right place. You don't need to undo it or anything like that. It's really not going to show. I mean, obviously if you stitch right across a very solidly stitched flower, it might show, but on this it's not going to show. And go slowly. When all else fails, hand crank. Remember to always hand crank in the same direction though. Okay, when you've got to the end, it's very important that you don't stitch over where you started, because it's actually quite hard to get the thread to the back. So just pull it out your machine and then turn it over and pull both your threads to the back. It's up to you if you tie them off or not. I usually do, just because I'm not always sure what's going to happen to the piece of work after I've done it. And then just trim off the tails, but don't trim them off too short. Same goes if you're going to mount this onto a canvas. Leave your tails, because then when you glue it on, you've got something to grab onto. So that's what it looks like when it's done. So that's nice close up there with some light on it as well. And you do get used to doing it. You get in the swing of it, and it doesn't take that long. If I wanted to do a large motif, you know, something that's maybe 10 inches by 4 inches with all the intricacies, it would probably take me about half an hour. I would suggest, if you are a lady person or a person going through hormonal changes, make sure you keep your hands and wrists warm. It is quite hard work on the hands and wrists, but you do get used to it. If you'd like to see me make it up into a pincushion and what the finished result looks like, you can join me next week. And now I think we should go and see what lots and lots of gorgeous saved embroidery appliqued onto a quilt looks like. So this is called Remembering Edie's Eiderdown. I entered it into a competition in 2017, and it was the first time I'd ever entered a international quilt competition, and I thought I'd just have a go. I'd had the idea. It's because of a very special lady in my life who's long since died, sadly, called Edie, and she was my great aunt, except she wasn't my great aunt. She was no relation to me at all, which I didn't understand when I was little. But she was a big part of my life from probably about the age of 5 until she died. I think I was in my pre-teens. I have spoken to my mum about it to see what she could remember, and we searched everywhere for photographs of her. I know somewhere I have a beautiful photograph of her when she was younger, and I have a really lovely one of her when she was an old lady. And in my eyes, she was the most beautiful old lady I'd ever seen. Now, I did find some photos. This is Auntie Edie. This is my mum. This is my granddad. This is when he married his second wife. This is my great-granddad, his dad. And this is my... I'm not sure who that is and who that is. One of them will be my great-aunt Marion, and one of them will be his wife. I think that's his wife. So that's Auntie Edie, and you can just see her. I'll try and scan this in anyway, but that's Auntie Edie. This is my great-aunt Marion. She is actually a great-aunt. No, she died before I was born. She was my great-aunt Edie's partner, which, again, I didn't realise as a child that there was anything odd about that. But Auntie Edie was a young woman in the First World War. Apparently she had a young man. Sadly he died, as so many young men did. But she had met my great aunt Marion at some point, either just during the First World War or just afterwards. I know that Edie did some nursing somewhere, not quite sure where, not really sure what Marion did, but they fell for one another. And back in those days, people weren't really that bothered about things. As long as you were a decent person and you weren't in the middle of the street shouting the odds, it really wasn't a big deal. And my family accepted Edie as one of us. to the point that I thought she was my aunt, my great aunt. I didn't realise she wasn't until she died. So that gives you an idea of what my family's like. And she was the kindest woman, especially to a very shy child having a few problems. She just showed me so much kindness and love and infinite patience. And I think she probably would have liked to have had children, but she adopted my mum and then by default me and my sister. So there were children in her life. This is me at 5 years old. Very determined young lady and also quite mischievous. So that's the little girl that she would have met. She was interested in music and sewing, and she and Marion worked for a very prestigious department store in Sheffield called Marshall and Snellgrove, and they worked in the haberdashery and alterations and sewing department generally. They would deal with the local sort of dignitaries' wives, helping them have their clothes adjusted and all of that. And also they would carry on making things when they got home, and when things had been altered past the point of fitting an adult, things would be altered to fit my mum when she was little. So she was probably one of the best dressed children ever. And they did handcrafts together, and they saved up every year. They scrimped and saved, and every year they would go abroad travelling. Now bear in mind they were together from definitely the early 1920s until the mid-1960s when my great Aunt Marion died. They must have gone to so many places, and that was so unusual. Remember, this is a really working class family. My family are really, really working class on both sides, but I think probably my mum's family is slightly posher than my dad's. There's not a huge amount in it. They all came from Sheffield. That was an unusual thing to do. One, women travelling on their own. Two, being working class and doing it. I know they went to Italy, and I'm pretty sure they went to Switzerland, and they probably went to Austria, but there's no one alive to ask, and I didn't think to ask when she was still alive. But they did do handcrafts together as well. They used to knit together. And this is one of the family stories that I absolutely adored when I was a child, which was that they would knit a garment together. So one of them would take the front, one of them would take the back, and they'd do a sleeve each. And when it came time to stitch it all together, obviously one of them had great tension and the other one didn't. So there was always one arm shorter than the other, and of course the front wouldn't fit to the back, which of course they thought was absolutely hilarious, would cry laughing and then undo it and start all over again. And that gives you a really good idea of what they were like as a couple, and just lovely people. And I remember one of the last times I went to visit my Auntie Edie in a little flat on the ground floor. She would have the window open at the side because there was a school nearby, and she liked listening to the children's voices, especially when they were walking home in the afternoon. And this flat inside was like something out of the 1920s and 30s. She had a beautiful china cabinet with all sorts of bits and pieces on top, lots of crocheted doilies, big fat armchairs, a standard lamp with a great big deep fringe. But she also, in her bedroom, had an eiderdown, which was actually green. I think my mum still has it somewhere. I should try and find it to strip it out of feathers. And I was fascinated by this eiderdown. It's probably where my love of paisley starts. I'm absolutely addicted to paisleys. It conjures up really happy memories for me. I think it's a beautiful pattern. And when I saw this fabric on the bed, it's very, very similar to eiderdown paisley. I knew it was one of those quilts that came into my head instantly. I knew that it was going to be an homage to this woman who touched my life for, sadly, such a short space of time, but has made an enormous difference to it. So I have incorporated the eiderdown fabric, and I've made it into a classic strippy. So strips of fabric going across the bed. All of the pieces of embroidery are rescued, which took forever. It took a really long time. And they do actually, all of the pieces of embroidery match the colours on the Eiderdown fabric. Here's an amazing bit of embroidery. This actually came off of a tablecloth, and it's pink, which you can't really tell. There was 4 pieces, one at each corner, and the tablecloth itself was obviously some sort of rayon mix, and it had terrible white marks on it as though someone had tried to wash it or splash something on it. So it was completely ruined, but the embroidery was just beautiful. I think you get an idea, but it's absolutely stunning embroidery. They are sweet peas and anemones. So there was 4 pieces, so there's 1 on each side, and I put 1 each in the middle strip. I have done a brief recap about how to make a small panel, and this has been done just timesing that by like however many. This was done on a great big roll of iron-on interfacing, and then cut out the strips, and then did all of the crazy patchwork, did all of the lace covering and the embroidery and everything. And I decided that I think it's about 12 inches wide, and I decided that that was probably the maximum I could get under my sewing machine, because to applique all of the embroidery on, I had to roll it up like in a roll, and then work on a small piece, and then roll it a bit like a scroll, and then just work on the middle bit, and just keep doing that. And that's how I did it. Any bigger and I think it would be quite unwieldy. I think it'd be quite difficult to keep track of. I would say if you wanted to do like squares, you could do 12-inch squares really, really easily using the technique, and I think they would look really, really beautiful. My personal thing is I don't like how Crazy Patchwork quilts look. I don't want to have, you know, an obvious edge of stuff, like a straight line. So I'm still coming up with how I could do many of these strips, stitch them together but not have an obvious straight line. I'll let you know if I ever discover it. This is the quilt, and it has been exhibited, and now you know the story behind it. And I will say that the comments when you exhibit a quilt, I think I've taken the label off it, because you have to label quilts when they go to exhibitions. So I can't show you that, but you get 3 judges will mark it. You enter it into a specific category, which I couldn't tell you what category I entered it into. I do not know. There's about 6 or 7 different categories that they mark you in, like the marks go from like excellent to, you know, not very good. And I did get quite good marks for it. I didn't get any not very good ones, and I got some hilarious comments. One of the comments was something about the lack of quilting. It is lightly quilted, I will give them that. I'm now going to ruin the beautiful setup to show you the quilting. Because the light's coming from this side, from here, it makes them look a bit strange, but I quilted it with like a vine line, you know, a trailing vine type thing, and then used the hearts as leaves, and just did very minimal leaves. I think there's about 6 on each side, and then each of the strips is quilted in straight lines. It's quilted all the way around the edge, so this thing's not going to move. There's not a huge amount to move, and it's modern batting anyway, so it's not going to have any problems. But I didn't have time doing the quilt to do any more quilting. What I probably would have done if I'd have had time was to quilt every piece of Crazy Patchwork. Some of these are small, so rather than get halfway through and realise I haven't got time, I thought it was better to quilt it as it made sense, as sort of mimicking an eiderdown. So one of the comments was not enough quilting. I could do more if I wanted to, but I don't think I will. I think it's actually true to itself. It is for sale. This quilt's been for sale for years, but in my cupboard for some years, so it's not going to sell there. And I'm going to hold it over now for my exhibition next year. Another one of the comments was about use of colour, and I got not applicable, which I thought was, well, I was a little bit miffed actually, because, so if I zoom out again, you can see quite clearly that I have matched identically this pink with the pink on the background of the paisley. It is as perfect as I could make it as a match, okay, as absolutely perfect as I could do it. That's not easy. That requires skill. Then, if you look at the saved embroidery, although I didn't do the embroidery, I spent ages looking for it. That's why I ran out of time in the end, because I was really struggling to find embroidery in the right colours. But all of it is in pinks and mauves and purples. And yes, I probably sort of over-egged the purple because it's very subtle on here, but I think it works. But all of it is the same colour palette as the quilt fabric. And I don't care who you are, that's not easy. So you can tell from 2017 I'm still a little bit annoyed. But anyway, you live and learn these things. It didn't stop me. I entered a couple of quilts the following year as well. And then after that I had my shop, so I just didn't have time. I will say, to balance out those two interesting remarks, and at least they bothered to, because they don't actually have to put any extra remarks. There was one judge who obviously absolutely fell for the quilt. She understood it. She understood the work behind it. She understood what I was trying to do. She really, I can't remember what she said exactly, but something along the lines of that it reminded her of those Edwardian Eiderdowns and like a 1920s bedroom or something like that. Spot on. She got it. That's what I was going for. So it was worth it from that. She also gave me like excellent in all of the marks, which was really, really kind. So that's my quilt story time about my lovely great aunt Edie, who showed me so much kindness as a very small child, and who I remember with so much love and fondness. And there's just one thing, my biggest, it's not a regret, it's an impossibility. My biggest thing is I wish she could see what I do now, because I think she would be so proud. And knowing that, you know, I do have a really lovely support network. My family are absolutely adorable. I couldn't do all this without them. It's not like I'm doing an Oscar speech. I have been very lucky in the people around me, and it started off so well, I think. Somewhere, wherever she is now, I think she would love this. I think she would absolutely adore to put this on her bed. It's got all the beautiful things that I think of about her. Quilts mean so much. What's behind them means so much. It can be as utilitarian as just needing to keep warm. It can be a type of therapy, something that's portable. It can be creative. For me, mostly, I'd say it was creative. I have had therapeutic quilts, as you know. I'll put a link to the English paper piecing quilt that I made. That was a real therapy quilt, so that's not finished yet. I mean, that's my quilt of a lifetime, that one. So I think I'm just rambling now, and I should probably shut up. And here's the beautiful quilt. Ta-da!